in the spirit of what we're studying on early church fathers, I'm going to deviate a little bit this morning from my usual prayer. It's kind of an apologetics prayer that we usually do. And we're going to go into prayer, and I am going to read Saint Clement of Rome, who we will be studying probably next week. His prayer, which was contained within a letter to the Corinthians. And here's the cool part about that, is that this letter to the Corinthians was probably written about the same time to Paul's letter to the Corinthians. So we have many other early theologians, pastors, people like Clement of Rome, besides Paul, writing letters, traveling throughout early Christendom. And this letter, which contains his prayer, and if you want to look it up or you want to pull it up for your own, it's what's called First Clement Prayer 59. First Clement Prayer 59, which is it was a recognized prayer by the early Catholic Church for many, many, many years. I was in a church, can't recall where it was, a Catholic church when I was doing my seminary studies into other religions. And it was a Latin mass. And they actually said this when a priest recited this prayer in Latin. Um, I took a little Latin in high school, enough just to get by, but what is such beautiful language. But I'm not going to say it in Latin. It's going to be in English. So let's bow our heads in prayer. We shall pray, Lord, without ceasing to the Creator of all things, and beg him to preserve the number of his elect throughout the whole world through his beloved Son, Jesus Christ, and not let a single one of them fall away. Through him you called us through darkness into light and gave us the knowledge of the glory of your name. He taught us to hope in you, from whom all creation has its being. He opened our eyes so that we would recognize you, Most High, among the highest, holy, and surrounded by holiness. You put an end to the pride of the arrogant. You frustrate the plans of the Gentiles. You raise up the lowly and bring down those who think they are exalted. You give riches and give poverty. You dispense both death and life. You succor every spirit. You are the God of all flesh. You behold what is hidden in the depths. You see all that men do. You give help to those in peril and rescue to those without hope. You create all that has breath and watch over it. You multiply the peoples of the earth, and from among them you choose those who love you through Jesus Christ, your beloved Son, through whom you give us wisdom, holiness, and honor. We beg you, O Lord, to be our help and our support. Free us from our troubles, take pity on the lowly, raise up those who have fallen, and give help to the poor, health to the sick, and bring home those who have wandered away. Feed the hungry, ransom captives, give strength to the weak, and courage to the faint-hearted. Let all people come to know that you alone are God, and that Jesus Christ is your begotten Son, and that we all are your people and the sheep of Jesus's flock. For by your acts you made visible the everlasting structure of the universe. Amen. And set the earth on its foundations. For all generations you have been faithful and just in your judgments and wonderful in your power and majesty. Wisely you have created and wisely you have kept things in being. All that we show that your goodness to all who trust in you, you are faithful, kind, and merciful. Forgive us our wickedness and injustices, our sins, and all of our transgressions. Come, Lord, let your face shine upon us that we may peacefully enjoy all good things. May your powerful hand be a roof over our heads, and may your strength preserve us from all wrongdoing. And we say that in your most gracious and merciful name. Amen.
Amen.
What a beautiful prayer. Um, and did you know? So we're gonna get into this later on. Clement lived between 30, get this, 30 AD, and we think about 100 AD when he was martyred. This is one of the extra biblical sources that we get of the Trinity. If you go back and read it, and by the way, the prayer is a lot longer than that, but for interest of time, I had to pare it down. But nonetheless, it's one of the earliest theological constructs we get of the Trinity. And when you read the whole prayer, for that matter, the whole letter, and you can get it online, you need to read the entire prayer contained within the letter to Corinthians. And this dovetails into what we're going to learn later on about the Trinitarian debates and the Trinitarian schisms and some wars that were fought over whether or not Jesus Christ was created by God, begotten by God, or was God. So the church fathers wrestle with that a lot, and we're going to get into a little bit of that later on. So I tell people, instead of hearing what your pastor said, or a priest, or a rabbi, or R.C. Sproul, or C.S. Lewis, or even me, go back to the early church fathers. And that's why we're doing this series. And everything that we bicker about, debate about between Protestants and Catholics, even amongst Protestants and Baptists and Presbyterians and Methodists, et cetera, all that muck and all that infighting, that was all still present among the early church fathers, who technically were the early Catholic Church. But the early Catholic Church in the universal aspect of it, we're going to see that growth later on. So let's move on. Again, a lot to unpack, but what a beautiful prayer. And that's my new note card, or note cards, because it's kind of long, that I have on my bathroom mirror that I recite every morning
You
now.
can do your announcement now.
Oh,
Remember,
Tess, if you're on, just real quick, we just went through First Clement 59 prayer, who is one of the early church fathers we will study. I just got a email Friday and again this morning that I'm going to be teaching and doing an Ask Me series for LifeWise's district in Anderson, South Carolina, which is half an hour away from me. So that's exciting. So, God has opened that door for me moving up here. So LifeWise keeps marching on. All right. So I just want again, I highly recommend this series of books on studying not only early church history, but the early church fathers. There's about, I think about 58 or 59 books, but they're small, they're concise, they're easily readable, and you can get one at a time. I think, don't quote me, I think they may be on Kindle, the patristic series. And so I think Ward was asking, I believe Clement's prayer will be in Clement's biography in one of these books as well. Another book, excuse me, I highly recommend for general church history. Remember, we learned last week, it's actually scriptural on Galatians and Corinthians, that knowing church history, knowing the early church is also part of our theology as well. So you can't parse out two, you can't bifurcate theology from church history. This is a great book that kind of melds the two, brings the two together. Bruce Shelby, Church History in Plain Language. This was I had this book from first year seminary for Introduction to Church History. It's easily readable, and it's very concise, and it gives a really, really good overview of church history, a lot of what we've been talking about and will talk about later. So I recommend this book as well. I had this up months ago, so some of you may have actually purchased it or gotten it. I think I saw it on Amazon for $9.99 or maybe $12.99. Great book to have in your library. Right. So today, before we get into some pretty exciting archaeological discoveries, my new thing I've been doing for the last couple of months is giving you guys some really great theologically fundamental quotes from the giants of our faith. R.C. Sproul. Some of you may not recognize that young picture, but yeah, he did look like that at one time. That's him as a young man. And this is one of his earlier quotes. When God writes our names in the Lamb's book of life, he doesn't do it with an eraser handy. He does it for eternity. Now, no, I'm gonna have a couple of people come back later and says, well, let's go to what Paul talks about in his epistles about losing your faith. I don't want to get into that right now. And the question is, once saved, can we be unsaved? That's not the issue right here. So, R.C. Sproul died about 2017. You guys may remember they still broadcast it. He had a really good radio series called Renewing Your Mind. Renewing Your Mind. Yeah, that's a Paul quote from Romans. I highly recommend if you have some. Oh, we have internet radio. Internet radio, you can find Renewing Your Mind. So I highly recommend listening to his, not only his sermons, but his debates that he had. He was a master debater and a really devout Christian theologian, apologist, pastor. Another quote you see there on the bottom, if God ceased to exist for a second, the universe would perish with him. Amen. God is the uncreated creator. He is a necessary being who happens to be our God. Everything else is contingent upon him, meaning it has to be created by something that doesn't exist before. And when I say substance like we see here on the earth, our flesh, our blood. Um, an uncreated creator had to create that as a contingent. And that's what R.C. Sproul is saying there. If the universe ceases to exist, I mean, God ceases to exist, the universe, poof, goes away. It's contingent upon him. And then finally, on the right, not a great Christian, but hopefully he's getting there, is a guy named Anthony Flew. Anthony Flew is probably one of the best known smart cookie atheist. Recently, Flew has had an epiphany, and this is his latest quote. I now believe that the universe was brought into existence by an infinite intelligence. I believe that the universe's intricate laws manifest what scientists have called the mind of God. Um, and down there it says Anthony Flew, philosopher, atheist turned theist. So that is huge. That is an incredible epiphany. And Anthony Flew I respected Dr. Flew. I read some of his books. And you could see in the later debates that he would have with John Lennox and one of my professors, a guy named William Lane Craig, that Anthony was starting to come around a little bit. But there you go. So hopefully we'll see him in paradise, and he'll hear the words, "Good and faithful servant." Um, so keep your eye on what he may be writing after this conversion that he had. And then, of course, you guys know I'm a C.S. Lewis junkie. And I highly recommend, don't be scared of watching the Chronicles of Narnia or reading the Chronicle of Narnia books. They're not meant they're not meant only for kids. There are incredible, incredible allegorical connections with Jesus and our grace and salvation system that permeate throughout the series. And these two quotes come from two books from that series. The first book is called The Horse and His Boy. So on those two pictures, you'll see a docile lion, and then you'll see a really rip-roaring mad lion. C.S. Lewis's main character in these books was a lion called Aslan or Aslan. Anyone care to take a stab or a guess who Aslan, the lion, represents?
Christ?
The
No.
Lion of Judah. And I'm not going to give it away. It becomes unmistakable how the character of Aslan interacts with the universe of Narnia. Anyway, so on the left, this is from the book The Horse and the Boy, which is part of the Narnia series. Now, hear me, Rabadash, said Aslan. And Rabadash was one of the boys who was trying to learn, anyway, who's trying to learn from the lion. And Aslan says, justice, and Rabadash got into trouble a little bit, but justice shall be mixed with mercy. And to me, that is probably the best nugget that we can, one of the best nuggets we can have of the theological attributes of a loving and merciful but just God. We committed an incredible crime and sin against an infinite, incredible loving being that has to be punished through justice, but with mercy. And God did that with his son, Jesus. And I highly recommend reading that book. And then on the right is from another book from a series called The Magician's Nephew. A lot of people tend to stray from these books because they conjure up a Harry Potter type of mythological world. C.S. Lewis uses that to draw kids in to give them the correct allegorical Christian worldview. So please don't think this is the same vein or the same type of genre of Harry Potter. It couldn't be further from that. So this quote right here, creatures, I give you yourselves, said the strong, happy voice of Aslan. I give to you forever this land of Narnia. I give to you the woods, the fruits, the rivers. I give you the stars, and I give you myself. What does that sound like? Give you a hint. Genesis 1. Well, C.S. Lewis did that for a reason. So I'm going to start. I may be teaching, right now, I'm teaching um, juniors and seniors in my Ask Me series. And those are going to be mostly 17, 18 years old. But if I do have the chance to go into younger kids, I'm going to start using this series of books because right now I've given them Mere Christianity and The Case for Christ, Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis, and The Case for Christ by Lee Strobel. And that's more geared for your older teenagers. These books are going to be geared more for younger kids. So, um, let's go on. Archaeological Discovery Thursday. So, ancient inscription revealing Christianity's clash with mysterious cult decoded by researchers. Yes, this just came online. Well, you can see up there July 5th. This was published July 5th, but has been in the works of vetting, peer reviewed, and getting accurate information before it becomes published. But nonetheless, this is exciting. It's very exciting news because this was an inscription that has now been authenticated to the early 300s, the early 300s. So even before the Council of Nicaea in 325, which we will study in a couple of weeks. This is found in present day Turkey, and it was found scribbled or inscribed in a temple to Mithras. Mithras, no, not the monster that Godzilla fought in Tokyo, but Mith, Mithras was a god of cosmic and light, kind of a creator god. And the temples to Mithras were rampant throughout the Roman Empire as one of their top pagan gods. Remember, the Romans had scores and scores and scores, maybe even hundreds of different pagan gods. Mithras was up there on top, cosmic and light creator god. The inscription that was founded, again, within 250 years of Christ's crucifixion in the most powerful empire the world had ever known up to that time, the inscription says this. Well, it was in Aramaic, and the Aramaic language is really hard to grammatically put together. But what it says is that it's a cross, and it has Jesus to, I mean, I'm sorry, Mithras to Jesus, Mithras to Jesus with a cross, and the Mithras symbol was completely obliterated. What happened was about early fourth century, early 300s AD, this temple was transformed from a pagan ritual temple to a Christian house of worship. Now, that is huge, huge news because it demonstrates, it authenticates the incredible spread of Christianity under persecution from the most powerful emperors and Caesars in the world, the known world. So that is the power of the resurrection that is occurring. And we're going to see more examples of that when we get more into the church fathers. So let's go on. This is from Fox News. And again, just to give a disclaimer, no, I don't get my archaeological discoveries or study them or analyze them through Fox News. I do this because it's easily recognizable, it's easily accessible, and I just love that a major news outlet is actually bringing Christianity and archaeological discoveries together. You're not going to see this on CNN or MSNBC or whatever it is now. Um, the next discovery we have, that comes from a good, vetted, highly respected source, which just so happens to be my archaeological professor in seminary up there on the right of the picture. This was taken by Dr. Titus Kennedy, who was my professor. I've recommended some of his books to you guys. This has been a rediscovery that has been debated highly amongst biblical scholars and archaeological experts, secular and Christian. This is the temple of Amun-Ra, and it is a stele or a part of a wall, of temple wall, of Amenhotep III at Soleb, Sudan. Soleb, Sudan. Soleb, Sudan is North Sudan near the Egyptian border and would have been part of the Egyptian Empire at the time of Exodus. You may recognize Amenhotep III. That's because Amenhotep III was Amenhotep II's son, who was probably, most scholars now believe Amenhotep II was the pharaoh of Exodus. So what's exciting here is that what's actually discovered on the face of that piece of rock you see there, rather large piece of rock, is this inscription that's on the bottom: the land of the Shashu of Yahweh. Um, Dr. Kennedy, this is his fourth or fifth trip there. He just got back a couple of months ago. He emailed me last week. So you recall last week, I was going to announce or disclose a really great discovery. He came back because he was getting a lot of debate, pushback about whether or not that meant that there was a presence of Hebrews, Israelites, or for that matter, a Semitic people in that region around the time of the Exodus. So this inscription has been confirmed now to be dated at about 1400 BC. 1400 BC. Go back, and now we believe, a lot of historians, biblical scholars now believe that the Exodus started about 1450, 1440 BC. So about 40, 50 years before this inscription. And Dr. Kennedy came back, that's been authenticated, and now it looks like, yes, what is on there is a recognition of a nomadic Semitic type of people in that area who worshiped Yahweh. The pushback came is that there has been a big debate about whether or not other Semitic people, including the Canaanites, the Moabites, the Philistines, et cetera, whether or not they also worshiped Yahweh or a God named Yahweh. That has been pretty much, the book is closed on that. Any biblical linguistic scholar, New Testament scholar, Old Testament scholar, anyone you want to put in there who studied scripture now will pretty much admit that the only Semitic people who worship Yahweh, and for that matter, the only people who worship Yahweh were the Hebrews or Israelites. So unequivocally, now there is a consensus that this inscription not only discloses a people who've been worshiping Yahweh, who were present at the time, even before the Exodus starts. So does that mean that the book of Exodus is 100% accurate? No, I'm not saying that, nor is Dr. Kennedy, but we're starting to see more pieces of the puzzle, pun intended, starting to be in place to authenticate that what we read in the Old Testament, in the Torah, in the book of Exodus, was indeed a historical narrative that now is starting to be proven, at least piecemeal, slowly, in archaeological discoveries such as this. So if you want to study this further and see the debate and see the infighting, but see the new disclosures and new discoveries, including Dr. Kennedy, all you need to do is type in this phrase. And unfortunately, AI comes up with a bunch of gibbly gook about that. But nonetheless, you can study this further or just email me and I'll give you some more information about that. All right. So thanks to my brother Collins. Keep him in your prayers as well. Uh, I love Collins because weekly he'll also help me augment my archaeological series. And he sent this to me last week, this archaeology magazine, which is a well-respected, well-known source. This is from Iran's State Board of Antiquities. Marble stelae or stellae, potato, unearthed in Nineveh. Anyone recall the city of Nineveh?
Jonah.
Good Jonah, that's right. The Ninevites were so evil, were so bad when they would come in, right? They're part of present day Iraq. And Nineveh was been a city close to Mosul, and some of you guys may have heard of Mosul. Was in the news during the Iraqi war. There were big battles going on between Americans and Iraqis. That's the same area that Jonah was instructed by God to go and evangelize because they would turn their hearts. And we all know the rest of the story, as Paul Harvey would say. He thought that they were so bad that there's no way he would want them to come into God's fold. That's not for us to do, that's for God to do. But nonetheless, the reason that Jonah had that type of fear, well, not so much fear, but disdain and disgust for them, some scholars believe that perhaps some of the Ninevites came and they would raid the kingdom of Judah and Israel, that maybe some of his family were actually captive and brought back. And what the Ninevites would do to some of the Israelites would skin them alive, and take their children and sacrifice them to their gods. Yeah, that's how bad they were, almost on the order of the Canaanites. But this stele demonstrates building projects by the kingdom of Nineveh at the time. And it demonstrates that, yes, it was a thriving pagan culture that goes in line with the book of Jonah. And specifically, it discloses the works of a king named Ashurbanipal, I believe. I massacre Assyrian names and Sumerian names for that matter. And the stele was found about 660 to 631 BC. Um, on the right, you'll see a map of what present day Israel looked during the time of when Kings 12. That would have been about 900-ish BC. So the Assyrians would have come in and taken over the green part you see there that was called Israel, which Samaria was the capital. And on the south, you have Judah, which Jerusalem was the capital there. We all know that eventually the Babylonians, the Assyrians tried to conquer Jerusalem. And we all know the famous story of the angel of the Lord comes down and wipes out more than 100,000 of the Assyrian troops. Um, we talked about that months and months ago. It's scriptural and it's also historical. And I think we brought those two together months ago. I can't spend too much time on that right now. But the part of Judah you see right there, and matter of fact, the Babylonians come in. Not only do the Babylonians come in and defeat or take over the Assyrians, they pretty much take over the whole green and orange you see right there. And we all know the story of destruction of the temple. I did this presentation last week to another group, and someone asked me, "Wait, isn't that the West Bank that you see, or what Palestine? Isn't that Palestine on there? Why is it named that?" Um, I'll give 30 seconds because we could spend years on this. That's Philistia. Philistia, it's not Palestine, folks. It was called Philistia, and it's the home of the Philistines. Yes, the same Philistines that had David and Goliath. And Philistia was conquered by David. But when we see Solomon's sons infighting, we're going to see the kingdom divided. The Egyptians come in because they don't want another unified Israel. The Egyptians come in and they conquer that part you see with Philistia right there in that light brown. It's not Palestine. The Babylonians come in, and when they completely take by 580, they completely take over that whole region you see there, that whole box. They take the people of Philistia, just like they did for some people of Israel and Judah, and take them back into Babylon. It was always called Philistia until the Romans come in and change the name to Syria Palestina, right? Not because it was Palestinian. The original Philistines were pretty much culturally wiped out by the Babylonians. There is no Palestine. It's called Philistia. And that's all I have to say about that because that opens up a huge can of worms, which it shouldn't. So let's go on. All right. Now let's get into the expansion of Christianity. And we left with this slide last week. So sorry for getting on the archaeological discoveries and the quotes, but I really think that that's probative. And I really think that's something that's really helps us with our faith. So now we launch into the early church, expansion of Christianity. There's a lot going on. God's timing is perfect, just like Paul says in Galatians, is that the timing and the place couldn't be more perfect to spread the news of Jesus. And because we see the Roman Empire was a cross-cultural empire, I mean, they had North Africa, they had all of Western Europe, even England, they had Iran, parts of Iran and Iraq. They were approaching India, go on and on and on. There was incredible, incredible expansion. And the good thing is that mostly the Romans, for the most part, would tolerate some of the cultural and religious worship that was going on. Uh, Not so much for Christianity, but we're going to see that there is a misconception that from 33 or 30 AD in 1 month until 382 or 325, when Christianity becomes tolerated and the official religion of the Roman Empire, there was daily persecution, mass persecution of Christians. That's not really accurate. We're going to see that it wasn't continual, but when it did happen, it was bad. When it did happen, it was bad. And we're going to cover a little bit about that in the next couple slides. The Roman Empire was often at war, and we talked about last week when the Romans or legions would go in. So you have some Christian groups would come in behind and start to evangelize. Well, that also didn't help with tolerating Christians, but it got Christians into territory that was safe for them because the Roman soldiers had pretty much, quelled the barbarians, as you would say. That's one of the reasons that we see the barbarian, Germanic, Franco-Hungarian tribes in about 400 to 500 AD when the Roman Empire falls. They are extremely, extremely receptive to Christianity. Now you know why France and Spain and Italy and most of Western Europe were heavily, heavily Christian Catholic nations until, of course, Henry VIII and the Protestant Revolution. But the the pagan Roman Empire's power and actual conquest helped Christianity grow. All right, timing was perfect. We talked about that. Go to Galatians 4:4. Paul says, but when the fullness of time was come, uh, the floodgates are opened. So right here, this is the first map we're going to look. And let me get my notes here because I'm not sure if you guys, that legend right there is so small. I tried to increase it for you guys, but it got too blurred. Let me find my little legend note. Okay, this is a map of the Mediterranean. Duh. This is the first 100 years. This is the first 100 years after Christ's resurrection. And the shaded parts you see there, right? So the first of all, the red dots that you see, the red dots are Christian communities. Right? This is the first 100 years, folks. Those little red dots, if you see them on your screen, are the first well-known Christian communities. Um, for the most part, especially in what you see present-day Turkey and southern present-day Greece, that's where Paul would have been doing most of his mission trips. Did you notice North Africa? Remember I said last week that the first Christian nations weren't Western Europe nations? They were Ethiopia, right? And Armenia. Ethiopia, the southern fringe of the Roman Empire, and Armenia, the eastern fringe of the Roman Empire. But this is an incredible growth and presence just within 100 years of Christ's resurrection. So that's the power of the resurrection that we're seeing there right there. So the black dots, if you can see some black dots, perhaps you can't see it because it may be too obscured. Those are going to be early, Jewish centers or cities at that time. And they're starting to constrict. They're starting to constrict more and more and taken over by Christian communities. The shaded areas that you see there, those would have been Jewish settlements right after Christ's crucifixion, and they shrink more and more and more and more. So what we'll see is a progression to, well, before we get into that, I want to get into this. So this is a map, and this map is going to be, let me get that map. This is going to be a map of about 600 AD. So if you look at the light blue, and which gobbled up the darker blue, and that's mostly going to be in North Africa, Western Europe, the British Isles, present day fringes of Iraq and Iran, at least their western borders, Armenia, parts of present day Russia, Ethiopia, so North Africa, East Africa, pretty much most of the Middle East, and then all of Western Europe, at least up to the Danube River. Um, the reason the Danube River is a border right there, if you see like where would Germany and Holland would be, the interior part of Northern Europe. The reason it's not Christian yet is because the Roman army hasn't yet come in and conquered those barbarians up there. But look at the 600 AD and look how fast Christianity has not only just put presence there, but these are now Christian nations. You see Italy right there, which includes Rome, that is now an official Christian nation. That's how rapid it has become. Fortunately, anyone care to guess why the map shrinks down a little bit, especially in all of Africa and most of what we see of Turkey up to Greece? So about 60 years later after this map, anyone care to guess what came in from the east? Islam, Muhammad, conquered by the sword. Did Jesus conquer by the sword? No. Jesus conquered through the good news, through love, through tolerance. Muhammad comes in with his hordes. He takes, you probably heard of the Moors, right? The Moorish invasion happened in about 660, 680 to 700 AD, and all the blue Christian presence you see in North Africa, gone. That's all now Muslim. Everything you see from present day Greece to the right, gone. Muslim, by the sword, conquered, eradicated Christians, eradicated anyone else who did not bow down or accept Allah as their God. Um, we all know about the Crusades. I should have a map here, about 1000 to 1100 AD. If you can see there, present day Israel, you will see a little red and a little blue. The red there demonstrates a Jewish community, but the blue part there is going to be Antioch. Um, Parts of Jerusalem is just right on that line right there. The Crusaders, that's when the Crusaders come in to reconquer the land of Jesus. And they pushed out the Muslims, but unfortunately, the Muslims come in and wipe out all the Christian crusaders and kick all the Christians out. And we still live with that type of paradigm. If you go to Jerusalem now, there are areas where our most holy sites are now Muslim controlled, and we need permission to access them. So we still feel the vestiges of the Islamic conquering of that part. But up until Islam comes through and conquers by the sword, that's how that's how vast the Christian nations are. And did you notice it's almost as big? The blue there is almost as big as the Roman Empire, almost as big. Matter of fact, a little bit bigger because up there in the British Isles, which now includes Scotland and Ireland, that's all Christian. That's all Christian right now. There are some anecdotal stories that haven't really been vetted out and probably aren't accurate, is that Joseph of Arimathea may have gone to evangelize in the British Isles. I haven't seen a really good source on that, and it's not a Dan Brown type of Da Vinci Code crazy stuff. There are scholars, vetted scholars, well-known scholars who believe that Joseph of Arimathea may have gone into England. So now you see that rapid growth of Christianity, and I think a lot of Christians don't realize the power of the resurrection caused that in the light of severe persecution that we're going to see. So, yeah, it had to be a God thing. And I'm sorry, but martyrs don't die for a lie, and martyrs don't go and evangelize through hostile territory to create what you see there in blue for a lie. And there had to be some incredible transformation from a son of Abraham. Because remember, the earliest Jews were mostly, I mean, the earliest Christians were mostly Jews. And then Gentiles come in, right? And they overtake and they help to spread Christianity as we see it. But nonetheless, really early on, there had to be some incredible, miraculous, supernatural event to cause a son of Abraham to now to become a son of Jesus Christ. Right. So, getting back to this map, this is a map of the earliest church fathers were whom? The 12 apostles. And how do we know that? Well, Peter becomes the Bishop of Rome, and we see other apostles getting instructed by Jesus to go out and evangelize, not just in Jerusalem or Judea, but in Acts chapter 1, he says to all the earth. Uh, and remember, during this time, there was some knowledge, maybe some real light trade, not much overland by foot with China, but that was considered, almost a different universe. And, Marco Polo overland became the first true explorer from the West to open it up, but that doesn't happen for another almost 1,000 years after Jesus' resurrection. So here, just real quick, that red line you see going through the Straits of Gibraltar, Spain, into England, that's supposedly, allegedly, the track that Joseph of Arimathea took. But let's stick with what we really know. And the source of this is from this book. And I know I tout this book and I know I push this book. No, I don't get a percentage of the sales. This is Sean McDowell, an incredible theologian and apologist, son of Josh McDowell, wrote the More Than a Carpenter. Uh, if you haven't gotten this book already, it's an incredible book, The Fate of the Apostles. It's extremely researched, vetted. This was his doctoral dissertation, and you could take it to the bank, folks. And this is where this map comes from. Um, the biggies I'm going to hit right now. Make sure I have this. So Philip, you have Philip going into Asia Minor. Asia Minor is going to be up there, you see, right below the Black Sea, present day Turkey for the most part. Um, that completely becomes a great Christian area. Right now, they changed the name from Turkey to Turkey or something like that. Now it's a big Muslim country. That started, right, with that Islam push in the late 600s, 700 AD. And then we have Matthew. Matthew goes into Ethiopia, and Sean thinks that there is some evidence that he may have been martyred or killed by spears. He was actually speared to death. Um, Philip probably was martyred. Maybe he was skinned alive in Asia Minor, present day Turkey. Um, Not much credence to that. Then we have Simon the Zealot. Simon the Zealot, he gets a bad rap with his name, number one. There's not much known about him. Sean will tell you about him. Simon the Zealot went into Persia, present day Iran, Iraq, that area. We don't think he was martyred. We actually think that he was pretty successful in creating lasting churches until the Islamic hordes come in. Um, James the Greater goes into Spain. Um, there's about a 50-50 consensus on that he goes into Spain. And we all know, of course, Paul goes throughout Eastern Europe, Western Europe, Crete, take that to the bank. And then we talked about Thomas. So Thomas goes into India. So there on the bottom of your screen, let me get that myself. On the bottom of the screen, if you can see there, he goes to the Red Sea, right? He goes through the straits right there, and he goes into across the Indian Ocean into India. If you guys can see that, and he goes to a place called Madras. If you guys ever have a Madras shirt, you know, the funny looking, looks like a quilt Madras shirt, that's where it comes from. Believe it or not, there is a Christian church and pretty good sizable presence in Madras, India to this day. There have been attempts to do some DNA, and Thomas stayed there, by the way, and he was martyred in India. He was accused of fooling around with one of the, and I can't remember what they called the Indian kings back then. I should know, but anyway, fooling around with one of the Indian kings in the southern region, and he was executed. There's been a push now to have DNA studies on some of those communities because the close-knit Christian community. Uh, Allegedly, Thomas may have fathered some kids when he was there, and whether or not we can get some DNA, but I don't know how you're going to match it with Thomas. But at least you could get some um, Jewish type of genomes to compare with. I haven't seen anything done about that. It doesn't matter because there is a strong Christian presence in Madras, southern India today, and there is very, very good extra biblical sources. And Sean McDowell gets into that, that Thomas indeed was there. But another incredible aspect of that journey back then, if you see that red line going to India, that would have been one of the most perilous journeys to take. Going across the Indian Ocean, this is not Magellan or Columbus. That's, that's way, way, way later. For Thomas to do that, and anyone recall Thomas's nickname at the time in the upper room?
Doubting.
Same one, Doubting Thomas. Well, Doubting Thomas becomes so bold. Oh, and by the way, before Doubting Thomas was Doubting Thomas, Thomas was also one of the guys who tells Jesus, if you're going to get stoned, let's go in with guns a-blazing. I'm paraphrasing. Let's go in, guns a-blazing. He goes from that to Doubting Thomas to now risking his life limb to get to India to spread the word of Jesus Christ. Again, it wasn't some beat up, bloody Jesus that dragged himself from the tomb half dead and showed up in the upper room that that lit the fire, that it caused an incredible transformation into the apostles. It was a resurrected Jesus in flesh and blood form. So I could go on and on, spend hours on this, but again, just go back to this book and you'll get that in a academic, easily readable context if you want to study that some more. I think I'm going to go ahead and we'll stop for today because this is going to take, I don't want to parse this out in half. So what we're going to do is we are going to now enter the phase of persecution in the early church that will also include the early church fathers. So I don't want to spend too much time on the earliest church fathers, which include the apostles of Jesus and also of Paul. We know a lot about that already. We discussed that months and months ago. I really want to go forward now on persecution when it comes to martyrs in the later first century, 90 AD and on. This is a letter written by Pliny to the Emperor Trajan in 96 to about maybe 110 AD about how to deal with Christians. And it ain't pretty. So what we're going to do is next week, we'll start with this letter from Pliny to Trajan, who was the Caesar of Rome at that time. And we're going to get into that letter, and it'll give you a pretty good idea or indication of to be a vocal, early evangelical soldier for Jesus back then pretty much meant certain death at different times and in different places. So again, an incredible miracle that Christianity exploded the way that we saw on those maps during this type of persecution. So we'll start with this next week. We'll read the letter. We'll just see just how bad it was for an early Christian, and then we'll talk about these different parts of the Roman timeline and the different types of emperors and their execution styles that were doing to Christians. In the background of that picture, yes, there were Christians who were fed to the lions. It's not just something you see in a movie. It wasn't a predominant, it didn't happen every day, but it was one form. Um, One emperor stopped it, and we'll see why later on. Usually it would have been execution, beheadings, which would have happened, or yeah, burning at the stake. Crucifixion went out of style. Crucifixion stopped in the Roman Empire about 50 years to 100 years after Jesus was crucified, for various reasons. So there were different modes. The Romans were experts at executions, by the way. So they're the ones who actually started a guillotine type of contraption. But back then they would use a broadsword, a
Hey,
big
Scott.
sword. Yep.
Collins has his hand raised.
Collins. Yeah, I'm sorry, Collins, brother. How you doing?
I'm better. Thank you. And thank you
Good.
for your prayer.
Of course.
Scott, Joseph of Arimathea was a trader, a sailing trader, and he traveled all through the Mediterranean, all the way up to England. And his interest in England was tin. And he brought tin. He got the tin from it. But what's interesting, there is a a reported story of Joseph of Arimathea rescuing Jesus from
Yeah.
the persecution uh, after Joseph died. Uh, he took Jesus through the Mediterranean to let Jesus study under the Druids, and that's part of the missing years story of Jesus. And also, Arithemia is reported to have brought Mary to Glastonbury in England. And it's an interesting, if you will, debate over whether that was the first Christian community versus Rome. So it wasn't just in Henry VIII. So that's a very interesting story that perhaps you can explore a little bit more from an archaeological perspective. And you're doing a great job. Keep it up. And thanks again for the prayers, all of y'all.
No, Collins, you're exactly right. And if you can see, I'm not sure if you can see the purple of present day England right now. Um, just like Colin said, that city you see there, Glastonbury, is where the tradition has, and Colin said exactly, that's one tradition is that he went there for trading, right? There's also another tradition that I didn't put on here for good reason, because this is more of a Dan Brownish Da Vinci Code type tradition. And I actually went there, Marseille, France. So on your map there, Marseille is going to be on the southern part of France. See that little, looks like a big cut in right there, like a little cove on the southern part of France. There's a little town called Marseille. There's a tradition, like Collins was saying, that Mary was brought there, that Jesus may have been brought there, and there's actually a church. There is a church on a little rock outcropping in that harbor that Jesus apparently taught in. So yeah, that's another tradition. The tradition that Collins and I were talking about with Joseph is more of a accepted tradition than Jesus teaching in Marseille. So yeah, thank you, Collins. That's a great point. And Sean, unfortunately, Sean McDowell in his book doesn't discuss Joseph of Arimathea because he is not one of the apostles. Um, Sean does include Paul, even though he says he's the least of the apostles, right? Nonetheless, he's still considered an apostle. So Sean does have a big, big section for Paul as well. All right. So next week, we will start with the start of organized, empire-wide execution and persecution. And I don't think I know any other type of religion, and I hate to call Christianity a religious system because Jesus came down to get rid of that, but for lack of better terms in our vernacular right now, no other religious system, um, cult, culture, whatever you want to call it, could have grown this rapid in this hostile type of territory and empire unless it was a God providential thing. And I'm not talking about God with little g. I'm talking about Yahweh, Jehovah, Jesus, Holy Spirit. By the way, I'm going to reiterate real quick that prayer that I read to you guys early on today by Clement of Rome. We think it was written about 50-ish, early 60-ish AD, is one of the earliest descriptions we have of the Trinity. Don't let anyone, the Dan Brown book, the Da Vinci Code, some other scholars, oh, the Trinity wasn't actually accepted until Council of Nicaea, and that was 300 years later. That couldn't be more wrong. That couldn't be more wrong. All right, guys, praying for you. Pray for Collins. Pray for Barry. For Dave. For Michael Sprague. Pray for my ministry. Pray for Valerie's new business. I'm praying for you guys. I'm excited to do this. So next week we will start with Christian persecution, and then we will I promise, we will get into the church fathers. Actually learning about the church fathers, and you're going to be amazed by the debates that they had back then that we still have today. Oh, and by the way, I know these are teasers. The Didache, it's so hard to say. Didache was a early Christian church instructional manual, and you'll never guess one of the instructions, or at least rules and regs, I'll call it, but actually a law, a church law against abortion. So when anyone comes and says, oh, that's something later on, and like, no, 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 no. Abortion was immoral, was illegal, and was a God-inspired commandment to not abort a fetus. And that is in this document, which came out about 100 AD-ish. So again, we have evidence of a prohibition against abortion through the Christian church as far back as 100 AD. So we'll also talk about that next week as well. All right, guys. I would take questions, but it's 9:36. So if you have questions or comments, email me.